All right, it is 1:02. I'm going to obviously continue letting folks in as they enter, but I want to kick us off. So nice to see you all. Thank you for joining. Happy beginning of spring. My name is Rachel Lieblein-Gerbala. I'm the programs manager at the Spencer Educational Foundation, and we are really thrilled to have Pat Nails with us today from Arch Insurance Group. I'm going to introduce Pat in a moment, and before I do, I just have a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have any questions throughout the presentation today, please feel free to pop them in the chat. As you just heard, both Pat and I will be monitoring the chat, and Pat's happy to answer any questions both as we go through and at the end of the presentation. Today's session will be recorded, so if you know of anybody who would like to watch but who wasn't able to attend today, or if you want to revisit it, we will be sharing the recording with anyone registered, and it'll also be posted on Spencer's website after the fact if you want to visit for some resources. We also have past webinars up on our website if you'd like to visit those as well. And just a note, obviously, we all know the drill. Please keep yourself muted throughout if you are not speaking or asking a question at that time. And I think that's all I had. So with that, I'm going to give Pat a brief introduction. He is currently the Executive Vice President and Chief Claims Officer at Arch Insurance. Pat received his bachelor's degree in finance from the University of Illinois and his Juris Doctor degree from the Chicago-Kent College of Law. Prior to joining Arch, he spent about 10 years at the Kemper Insurance Companies and 5 years in private practice in his hometown of Chicago. Pat joined Arch in 2004 and held a number of positions in legal, claims, and reinsurance before being named general counsel in 2012, and he became the chief claims officer for Arch in 2018. And with that, Pat, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for giving your time today. I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Rachel, thank you very much. Thank you for setting this up, and to the Spencer Foundation for giving me this opportunity to speak, to my employer Arch, who set me up with you guys, and then finally to all of you for joining us on what is a glorious day here in the Northeast. I'm coming to you from my home office in Yardley, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 minutes north of Philly, about an hour southwest Manhattan, and I'm dressed like I normally am, but let's talk something that's on everybody's minds right now. Let's talk about our brackets, because it was a long weekend of basketball. Now you will see, I will show you, I'm wearing my Villanova quarter zip. My younger daughter goes to Villanova. She's a junior there. Nice win over North Texas last night, although they've got a tough job ahead of them playing Baylor on Saturday. But that's only half the story. Rachel kind of gave away what I couldn't decide I was going to tell you or not, but I'm originally from Chicago, and I am a graduate along with my wife, one of my sisters, and a niece and a nephew of the University of Illinois. And I had Illinois winning it all this year. I thought this was finally the year, and unfortunately, a sister school, not only in Illinois, but in Chicago, Loyola beat us yesterday. So I'm very disappointed about that. And I'm not afraid to lie. It totally blew up my bracket when your NCAA champion goes out in the second round. It doesn't matter what happens from here on out. I'm not winning anything this year. So I'm here to speak to you today about culture. And that's kind of a fuzzy word. I mean, what does that really mean when you talk about culture? Outside of the corporate world, if you talk to anthropologists and sociologists, they will tell you that if you want to learn about a culture of a people or an area, you go and you learn about their art, you learn about their food, and you learn about their music. You eat their food, you learn what's behind it, you learn about their art. However, in companies and organizations, we don't make art or music unless you're in the record business or the movie making business. We don't make food typically unless you're in the restaurant business. So, it's a word that's hard to define in a lot of ways, and then even harder to figure out what is a company's culture. So how do you determine a company's culture? Well, let's start with the academic definition, and then I'm going to work from there. So let me move to page 2 of my presentation here. So here's, if you go online, this is what you're going to find as a definition for corporate culture. It says corporate culture refers to the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize members of an organization and define its nature. It is rooted in an organization's goals, strategies, structures, and approaches to labor, customers, investors, and the greater community. Now, I don't mean to make fun of my friends in academics, but when I read that, I was like, ugh, what does that mean? But as I looked at it, I began to focus on two things, two words in there. One of them was shared, because what that really means to me is it's something that all of the members of the company have together. Okay, so when you're thinking about culture, one of the things you want to think about in a company, what's consistent across the company? What do you hear all the time about the company and the people in that company? The second one is approaches. When I saw the word approaches, I thought about interaction, because it's just not about the shared or consistent words that you hear about a company, but it's about how they interact, how a company and their employees interact with all its different constituencies. And that just doesn't mean it's employees, it means it's leaders. And how do they interact, with other employees, with their customers, with their competitors, et cetera. So keep those two things in mind. Now, I'm going to tell you a little about my journey briefly here, because I'm going to be honest with you. I labeled this slide my journey, and I said it's all about culture, stupid. Now, that's not a reference to anybody else but myself, because I will tell you, I went to the University of Illinois, got my degree in finance, figured out probably about my junior year that I didn't want to be a banker. Thought law school might be a good option, ended up going to law school. And when I graduated law school, I couldn't care less about culture. I thought that when you went into the work world, if you paid me well and you gave me really interesting things to do, I would be really, really happy. And I go to work for a law firm in Chicago. Now, I will tell you, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody who has parents with who work for law firms out there, because they may tell you the same thing, and it's particularly true of big law firms. Law firm cultures are some of the worst cultures on this planet. And it's for a variety of reasons. I mean, some of it is it's because you eat what you kill. In other words, the money you make is a function, particularly as you move up in the law firm, of the business that you bring in. So it becomes very internally competitive, and then that just drives certain other things within the culture that can make it really, really difficult. Now, that being said, some law firms are tremendously successful despite those dynamics, despite the fact that their culture might not be the best. So after spending about 5 years with a law firm, I moved to the Kemper Insurance Companies, which is a very large, very old insurance group, had been formed in 1912. So I joined them in 1994. One of the great things about Kemper, and I spent 10 years there before I moved on. One of the great things about Kemper is that it was very paternalistic or very maternalistic. It was very much about developing its employees. And that was a great place to learn as a young lawyer. And despite the fact that I had been in private practice for 5 years, I was still a young lawyer at the time. However, Kemper, on the flip side of that, was a very slow and lumbering company. It didn't adapt to the changing business environment. It was also a very isolated company, and it was headquartered in a town called Long Grove, Illinois, which, if any of you are familiar with Chicago, is about an hour and 20 minutes northwest of Chicago, about 45 minutes northwest of O'Hare Airport. Now, let me tell you something. I was born and raised in Chicago. Other than at that time, I've since moved out to the East Coast. Other than spending 4 years at the University of Illinois down in central Illinois, I'd always lived my life in the Chicago area in the western suburbs. I had never been to Long Grove, Illinois until the day I interviewed for that job. It was way on the outskirts, and it created kind of an isolated type of culture, which can sometimes be dangerous, because you're not as in tune what's going on in your business, what's going on out there with your competitors. And those two things ultimately led to Kemper's demise. In 2002, they had to file for receivership. They were essentially out of business. Now, just so we're very clear here, ultimately they sold the name. So there's another group of companies out there that are named the Kemper Insurance Companies. They are not the same entity. Spent 10 years there. And then I joined Arch, and I've been with Arch for the last 17 years in a number of roles. And I will tell you that I believe Arch has one of the best corporate cultures, certainly in the insurance industry, possibly throughout all industries. And now, full disclosure, I drank the Kool-Aid on this company a long time ago. I'm extremely biased about the company, having spent 17 years there. Now, I'm not going to tell you about the Arch culture right now, because I'd like to kind of talk about why culture is important, how you learn about a company's culture, the questions that you ask when you're talking to someone at a company, and then that will lead me to kind of describe the Arch culture near the end. But my point in telling you about my journey is that it was only through what I learned working for these different entities, how important culture was. Now, let's talk about that. Why is culture important? Well, look, if you don't have a good culture, ultimately, I mean, let's cut to the conclusion here. Let's go down to the bottom of this next page. Culture simply drives the success of any company, period. You know, and there's nothing more that needs to be said. Culture equals success, ultimately, or long-term success. So why is it important and why does it drive the success? Well, first of all, let's look at the first two bullet points there. Two of the warning signs, if you read about culture, that a company's culture needs improvement, is that you will have increased employee turnover and you will have difficulty hiring talented people. Now, let's stop right there. If this were Richard Branson talking, and that would be much more interesting than me talking, Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Atlantic, he would tell you that everything begins with hiring great people. You know, if you do that, your company will succeed. So think about, tie that to culture. Are you going to be able to hire great people and keep them if you don't have a great company culture? This would suggest that the answer is no. And then you also create this other dynamic if you don't have a great company culture. One of the things I've seen in companies that didn't have a great culture, it existed in the law firm that I worked for, was us versus them mentality. And what I mean by that, it was us employees versus senior management. We were not on the same page. And again, that goes back to the first two bullet points, that if you have that type of mentality, you're not going to keep great people and you can't build a great company. And then finally, consistently, studies show that if you do not have a great culture, you have declining quality and customer satisfaction, you know, in your product or in the service that you present. So everything relates back to culture. I guess the last thing that I would also say about this is a point that I didn't put on here, which is true today. I mean, one of the things that's changed in the business world over the last 20 years is how fast that we change, how dynamic the competitive landscape has become. Some of that driven by technology, some of it driven by communication, driven by a lot of different factors. If you don't have a great company culture, you will fail as a company to recognize and adapt to the changing business conditions, to the changing technology. You have to have a culture that's able to recognize that, absorb it, and begin to move forward and adapt to those changes. So let's turn to the Arch culture. Why do I think Arch is a great company? Let me get to that page. I apologize. So there are really 5 things that I will talk about when it comes to Arch. One of them is accountable. We all hold ourselves accountable. And what I mean by that is, now you have to remember, I joined Arch in 2004. We were only 2 years old. The company was formed in 2002. We had about 300 employees, maybe 350 employees. We weren't exactly a startup, but we were pretty close to being a startup. And at that time, if we needed to do something because we were growing so fast, people just jumped in, helped out, and did it, and held themselves accountable to get it done. Now, that is a very common trait of startups, technology companies in Silicon Valley, small companies that are just opening up their doors, whether it be in New York or Charlotte, North Carolina. One of the things we've been able to do at Arch, even though we're a much bigger company now we have over, I want to say about 1,300 employees in North America, well north of 2,000 worldwide, is we still have this idea of holding ourselves accountable. People jump in, help out, hold themselves accountable to get things done. We do not have strong silos necessarily. People from different units will collaborate to get things done. The second bullet point that makes us different is that we're approachable. And here's what I mean by that. And I realize that this is a little self-serving because I'm part of senior management, but I have never worked in a company where senior management is as approachable as the senior management is at Arch. And let me relay a story to you that I think really highlights that. So I became the chief claims officer at Arch in 2017. Actually, I'll be coming up on the 4 years in about, excuse me, in 2018, 3 years in about 2 weeks. I've been the chief claims officer for about a couple months. I'm sitting in my office one day and my assistant, Penny Lewis, comes in and she says, Pat, Mark Grandison is walking around the floor. He's talking to people. Now, you guys don't know who Mark Grandison is. He is the CEO of the Arch Capital Group Limited. So in other words, he's the CEO of our holding company. He is the boss of all of us who work at Arch. Okay. And I looked at her because I know Mark. Mark has been with the company about a year longer than I have. We've worked together over the years. And I said, Penny, that's fine. That's what Mark likes to do. He likes to walk around. He likes to get a sense of what's going on. He likes to chat with people, ask them what they're doing. Now, think about that. Arch is now, based upon our market cap, I'm not exactly sure where we're at right now. I'll call it a $17 billion to $18 billion company. We have three different operating units: our mortgage insurance group, our reinsurance group, our insurance group. We have north of 2,000 employees worldwide. We do business all around the globe. Now, Mark Grandison, suffice it to say, is an incredibly busy man. Okay, but he takes the time when he visits offices to walk around, talk to the employees, see how they're doing, just chat with them. It isn't scheduled. He just does a walkabout and talks to people. He shows up to our company gatherings and just doesn't give a speech and leave. He will give a speech, then he'll mingle with people, talk to them, see what's going on. That makes us a very approachable senior group. And it's one of the traits you want to look for there, because it really is the leaders who set the tone on culture. So when Mark does something like that, think about how the rest of us see that and how are we going to react to that. I was fortunate. I had a mentor who taught me to manage by walking the floor. So I spend a lot of time out on the floor, talking to people, going to offices, talking to people. But it is really Mark who set that culture for all of us. So we are a very approachable senior management team. Third one is we're very proactive. And what that means is we don't let problems fester. And I will go back to my previous history of working at Kemper. They waited way too long before they figured out what was going on and how the marketplace was changing. And by the time they were able to react to it, it was too late. Okay, we had a saying: the company was dead before they knew it. It was just too late for them to react to these changes. And because we're proactive, we're able to avoid that mistake. But some of that, comes from the fourth bullet point, which is everyone challenges assumptions and assertions. And that means everyone from someone like me in a senior claims leadership role to someone who might be a junior claims adjuster. I mean, one of the things I tell the people who work for me is I don't need you to tell me when I'm right. I really need you to tell me when I'm wrong. I need to understand that we may not be thinking about this the right way, so that we can be proactive and we can fix that problem. And that's something that exists around the company at Arch. We have a saying, which is fail small, fail fast, fail better. And the reason we say that one is, think about what we just said. We're allowing people to fail. And that encourages people to speak up and challenge assumptions and assertions, and we also say, look, if there's a better way to do it, let's find a way, but let's do it in a very small pilot program or something to see if it actually works. And then we might learn from it and get better. It may work, it may not work, but this really allows everyone to challenge assumptions and assertions. The final one may actually be the most important thing about the Arch culture. And I know, again, this is self-serving to say, but I actually have some evidence to back this one up, is we're just a nice group of people. When people ask me over the years, why do you love Arch so much? I say, because I work with a great group of people. They're really nice. But then it occurred to me one day, I said, maybe I'm just a jerk and I just don't know it, because I'm surrounded by all these other jerks, and we all think we're really nice. But we did a survey about 2 years ago of our brokers who we write business with or through. And one of the things that came back from the survey, and they used a much more descriptive term that would be inappropriate for me to use, they just said, you don't have a lot of jerks at that company. Which to me, was absolutely correct based upon my experience from working at the company for 17 years. And I will tell you this, I also believe that it is the most underrated quality of successful people these days. The days of the dictatorial CEOs and the dictatorial managers are over. Those are long gone. Our corporate culture throughout the United States and throughout the world has evolved beyond that. I think it is important to be nice and deal with people in a forthright manner. Now, just so you guys know, that doesn't mean that you don't have to deliver tough messages. I mean, I've had to have sit downs, whether it's with employees, whether it's with claimants, and deliver a pretty tough message, but you do it with dignity and respect. Now, that's great. I've told you all about my journey. I've told you all about, how I learned how important culture was. I've told you maybe some things about good cultures and bad cultures. And I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, well, that's great. Now I know why it's important. How do I get a sense of a culture? What do I do as I'm out there in the workforce, looking around for either my first job or looking for a new job? Let's talk a little about that. First of all, read, research, go online, find articles. There is a ton of stuff out there now about corporate culture, and even just read articles about the company that you are looking at any given time. You'll be able to pick up on it, whether it's in the Wall Street Journal, local newspapers, New York Times business sections. Go Google the company, read about what they're doing, what people say about them. There are certain things that you can be looking for. Are there articles about how aggressive they are as risk takers? That's not always a good thing. I mean, think about Enron and what happened to them. You can pick up on some of those things as you read articles. Second one, ask around. Do you know anybody who works at the company or in the industry, or someone who just previously worked at the company? Now, I'm talking to everyone here I think is involved in the insurance business. Let me tell you something. As big as insurance is, we're really not that big an industry. We all know each other. So it's actually pretty easy to go out there and ask around to people, what's the reputation of this company? What's the reputation of that company? Now, I will also tell you, be a little careful with that, because company cultures do change over time as management changes, as mergers and acquisitions take place. I'm not going to name names because that would be unfair, but there are companies I know of, one that had a reputation as being a really, really difficult culture to work in that I think has changed over time because of a turnover in management. There's a second company that had a great reputation as a culture you wanted to work in, and subsequently there's been a merger with another company. I think it has changed the dynamic there. So you have to be a little careful as you talk to people and ask around, because sometimes you're going to get the answer of what the culture was 10 or 15 years ago as opposed to what it is now. So talk to people about, have there been changes at the company? Here's the other thing. Ask questions during the interview process. Let me give you a little tip here on how to ask difficult questions. It's something that I learned not too long ago. I always start out, when I'm going to ask a really difficult question, I start by saying, I'm just curious. Can you tell me about that? It is amazing how those two words, or I guess it's four words, or 3 words, I'm just curious, okay, how that changes the mood or the tone of any type of question. And I will always lead off when I'm asking what I think is going to be a difficult question. I'm just curious. Can you tell me about this? So for you guys, as you go through the interview process, or as you talk to people about a company, here are just some of the questions you could ask. And I'm not going to go through all of them because you can read it. But, around here, what's really important? What kind of people get promoted here? What are the behaviors and attributes that get rewarded? Who fits in? Who doesn't fit in? Ask them about the negative side of the culture. You can do that by saying, is there anything about the culture that frustrates you? Because that's always an interesting answer that you get. And let me tell you how important this is. In my role as Chief Claims Officer, we have 215 people in the Arch Claims Department. I don't interview a lot of people anymore. My senior managers and my managers do most of the interviewing. And it's only for the most senior roles will I ultimately interview a candidate. And by that time, they've gone through several levels of interviews. Okay, and typically I'm presented with 2 or 3 candidates that I will interview. Now, I can tell you right now, every single one of the candidates that I interview is extremely qualified for the position. There's no question that any one of them could do the job. At that point, the sole thing I'm asking myself, and I will ask questions to see, will they fit in to the Arch culture? Okay, and will they bring anything more to the culture, because I'm always looking for someone. Think about what I talked about earlier. Will they question assumptions and assertions? Do they have a perspective that I know they'll do that and they're going to bring that to the table? Those are the only two things I'm looking for. And I spend a lot of time asking a lot of different questions to try to get to the bottom of that. I am very impressed, and it actually doesn't happen very often. I'm very impressed when people start to ask me questions about the Arch culture, because then I start to figure out they're actually also trying to figure out, will they fit in here? Will they thrive here? And that's an important point, because my last comment about this, as you determine whether you fit a culture or a culture fits you, is at different times during your career, different cultures are going to fit you. Now, think back to my Kemper days. Remember, one of the things I said is Kemper was a very paternal and maternal company. They really believed in developing their employees, and they worked hard to do that. That was a great environment for me to be in as I was learning about the insurance business, because remember, I came from private practice. So I spent 10 years growing in that atmosphere. When I came to Arch, I had the experience. I was looking forward now to doing leadership positions, to trying out new ideas, and coming to a new company, essentially a startup, and having that opportunity. That culture fit me at the time. So you need to think about cultures differently as you work through your career, and you're at different stages of your career, which brings me to my last slide, I believe. And let's talk about you now. And these are just going to be some observations that I've had. Some of them relate to culture, some of them don't relate to culture, but they're things I want you to think about as you move through your career. Now, first of all, and this is hard as you're beginning your career to think about it this way, careers are not always linear. And what I mean by that is, if you look at your screen, they're not always moving up like this. Okay, but that's not a bad thing. Let me tell you a little about my story, particularly after I got to Arch. So I spent 10 years at Kemper. I'm by training a corporate lawyer, actually by training a commercial litigator. I spent 9 of those 10 years working in the corporate legal department, doing a variety of different things. I fortunately worked under General Counsel John Conway, who hired me, who was not adverse to letting young lawyers learn and do different things. So I did everything from insurance regulatory work, mergers and acquisitions, oversaw litigation, basic contracts. When Kemper got into trouble for the last year, they came to me and they asked me to run the surety claims unit. I knew a little about surety, and nothing special about that, because when a company's blowing up, if someone's there, they're like, hey, can you do this? So I ran surety claims for a year. I then got recruited away by it was actually a Kemper senior executive who came to Arch. Now, when I came to Arch, I was recruited by this executive who was in the reinsurance world to help start up the ceded reinsurance unit for the insurance group. So that's our internal purchasing group for our reinsurance. And I ran the claims operation there, something completely new, completely different. It was not, from a title perspective, a move up. It was very much a linear move, okay? It was not a promotion, is what I'll say. After doing that for 3 years, they sent me back to the corporate legal department, and I was running a bunch of different areas in the legal department. And then after doing that for another 2 years, they walked into my office one day and they said, we have a problem in surety claims. They need you to go down to Philly and work in surety claims. And I ran the surety claims unit for 3 years. Again, not a promotion, a lateral move. But I gained so much experience in doing these different roles and doing these different things, that what I'm telling you is, don't always get caught up in this idea. Many of us have the idea, look at it from an underwriting perspective. You join an insurance company, you go from junior underwriter, senior underwriter, AVP, VP, SVP, and finally CEO. That's not always how your career will go. But the beauty of it is, and I always frame it as, don't be afraid to take a left-hand turn. I mean, I was in the legal department at Arch. I was doing what I was supposed to do. I was very happy, and suddenly they asked me to run surety claims. That was a complete left-hand turn in my career, and it was a lateral move. Now, what I didn't know at the time is it was considered the biggest problem that we had in the company. I was very naive. I should have asked a lot more questions about the opportunity before I did it. But I went in there and I worked with a group of people to fix the problem. And I gained a ton of experience, not only from the idea of learning about surety, but also from the idea of how to manage people, how to deal with a problem, how to work through situations, how to communicate with senior management as you're trying to work through the problem. And all of these skills, from not being afraid to take that left-hand turn, put me in a better position when I finally did get the opportunity. As Rachel noted, I became the general counsel in 2012. I thought I was going to finish my career there, by the way, until in 2018, they asked me to be the chief claims officer. None of those things happen unless I take a bunch of these left-hand turns during the course of my career, because I just gained a vast amount of knowledge and experience in doing these different things. A very good friend of mine, Steve Jalcott, who works at Arch, he says it a different way. He says, just say yes to opportunity. Doesn't matter what the opportunity is, just say yes to it, because ultimately it's going to benefit you during the journey of your career. And you're going to be doing this for 40 years plus, and you're going to gain these experiences. We're going to make you better and put you in a better position as you move up the corporate ladder during your career. Two more things that I just want to message. Ask questions. Okay. Do not be afraid to ask questions, particularly of those people who are more senior than you. And when I was a young lawyer and when I was much more junior in the insurance business, I didn't do that. I was too nervous to ask questions. But then I learned something as I got older. And let's just be honest. We all have egos. We all like to talk about ourselves. Just go up to a senior executive, tell me about your career. Tell me about what worked. Tell me about what didn't work. People will talk to you about that. They like talking about that, not in a bad way. They look at it as I'm giving my experience to other people. And that's all it takes. And then finally, I'm going to go back to what I talked about earlier. And I really do mean this. I think this is the most underrated quality of successful people these days, is be nice. That doesn't mean you're not going to have to be tough sometimes. You're not going to have some difficult conversations, but treat people with dignity and respect. And they will view you as being a really good leader because of that. The days of the dictatorial managers and dictatorial CEOs are over. I think there's an expectation as to how you manage people going forward and how you deal with people. So I really would encourage you to be nice. It is a defining characteristic of where I work at now, Arch, and I think it has been one of the big reasons for our success in the 17 years that I've been there. So with that, I will open it up, and guys, I'll answer any question. When I speak to employees at Arch, I always like to joke, because I told you our senior management team is a really great group of people, and they interact a lot with the employees. But I always tell them, ask me whatever you're afraid to ask Mark Grandison, who's the CEO of our entire operation, or Matt Schulman, who's the CEO of our operation in the US and in Canada. I'll answer any question. So thank you very much for your time today, and I hope this was helpful, and feel free to shoot me some questions.
Thanks so much, Pat. Oh, Robin has a question. Robin says, great presentation. Thank you very much. Could you share a few of the questions you use in your interviewing to help determine if a candidate fits the Arch Insurance culture, differentiating between several very qualified candidates?
Yeah, so one of the questions I will ask them, I try to get outside of their work. I want to understand, I know this is a trite term, but I want to understand what makes them tick. So one of the questions I will ask them is, tell me about something you did outside of the work world that helped you learn something that you use inside the work world. Tell me something about your personal life. I had one individual, it actually was one of the best answers I ever got. He talked about becoming an Eagle Scout, and he talked about they have to do a service project for that, and how that involved engaging other people to be part of the service project, and how he took that and used that as something he used in the work world. So I will ask a question like that. I do ask questions about, tell me about a time when you failed. Now there's a very good way to answer that question, guys, I will tell you, because I actually had that question asked of me several times. And what you do is you do talk about a time that maybe you failed, but you turn it in, you then twist the question around and you talk about how you how you took that failure and you learned from it. And that's actually what I'm looking for. I want to see, okay, this didn't work out, but here's what I learned from that, and it caused me to change how I'm doing things. So those are two of the questions that I will ask. And I found the one that's interesting is the one about something that they've done outside the work world. That has stumped people. Here's another question that I ask, and I will tell you, I don't necessarily ask it about the culture thing, but I want to come at them from a perspective of ask them something that they're just not expecting. Okay, and it's going to cause them, I want to see how they react in that situation. The question I'll ask is, if you could have dinner with anybody, alive or dead right now, tonight, who would that be? And you get some really interesting answers there to be answered. So those are some of the questions I will ask during the interview process. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. We have a question from Delaney Peters. What would you recommend to someone who is trying to help facilitate positive change in a company's culture, but they feel that their role is too small to make a difference?
Wow, that is a really, really great question. Um, Delaney, was it? Delaney, I would tell you engage. It's all about engagement. Look, first of all, changing a culture is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, there is so much inertia in companies, and that's any company. I don't mean that to be critical of anybody. I would tell you the same thing at Arch, as we've tried to change certain things about our culture because not everything's perfect. Just engage, and then I would use, however you want to change the culture, that's the way you need to act. Okay, people will follow people's leads, whether you're a leader or not, to be perfectly honest with you. Or what I mean by that is whether you're in a leadership position or not. So I would encourage you just to engage, because first of all, no matter who you are, no matter what role you're in, it is hard to change a culture. And I will tell you, remember what I said early on in the presentation when I was talking about Mark Grandison. He leads by example. The things he does, that sets the tone. Okay, you don't have to be the leader of the company to set the tone. You can be working in a department, and the way you engage, the way you interact with people, the way you treat people, the characteristics that are you in the way you work, that'll start to set the tone. But it's not an easy thing, Delaney. I don't want to mislead you. It'll take some time, but I would say just remain engaged and do those things in a way that you would like to see the culture be going forward. And talk to people about it. That's actually okay. Have discussions about culture. I think it's something that we need to continually talk about as when we're in a company. Okay. Any others?
I have one, Pat. I'm curious what you would tell somebody who doesn't know what they're looking for in a company culture. How would you recommend sort of identifying what your priorities are when you're starting to look for the company that you want to work for?
That's a great question, Rachel. And that question comes up in a lot of different contexts. And you have to learn about yourself. Okay, we all have strengths and weaknesses. So here's what I mean by that. If you're someone who likes, well, I'm gonna answer that in a couple different ways. So let me give you an example of that. One of the things I've learned throughout my career, because I've run now 1, 2, 3, 4 different units, and every time I've had to go into those situations, typically I've had to improve those units. They weren't performing well. And I learned that I really enjoy that. To me, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. I go in, I got to figure out what isn't working, and then I got to implement that change. Sometimes it's just communication. Sometimes it's process. Sometimes it's technology. Unfortunately, sometimes it's people. I enjoy doing that. So when I'm giving these presentations to students, one of the things I will say to them is, you never want to take over the best run unit in a company. And people look at me like I'm crazy. And I said, no, think about it. Where can you add the most value? It's taking over the worst run unit in a company. Okay, that's where you could go in and add the most value. The problem with that is not everyone's personality, and it's something I learned about myself, is I enjoy going in and doing that. I don't mean that in a bad way. Let's figure out what isn't working. Let's then make those changes to make it work. Now, let's go to the flip side of the coin. We have lots of units that are run really, really well. And when the leader of that unit moves on, retires, there's a lot of value in putting someone in charge who likes to take these really well-run units and squeeze out that 2% better. Okay, now I'm going to be very honest with you. That would drive me crazy. Okay, I couldn't do that. I tell you that story, and it's not really related to your question, Rachel, but to kind of get to the foundation here. You have to learn about yourself. Okay, what's important to you? Look, you may be a person who loves digging deeply into problems, working individually, okay, to figure something out, to work on a project. And there are corporate cultures out there that reward that it's important to them. We need people to really focus, work on a problem, work a little more individual as an individual as opposed to a group. So I think the first question is figure out what's important to you, and then you start to ask the questions to drive out or figure out what your personality is like, the atmosphere that you work the best in, and then ask questions from there to figure out if those cultures fit you. So it really starts with you, Rachel, if that makes any sense, and figuring out what makes you tick as an individual and those situations within which you work the best. I think that's where it starts. Okay.
Awesome, thanks.
Any other questions, guys?
We have a question. So Quinlong Liu is a PhD student in risk management and insurance, new for industry jobs. Could you let me know what types of jobs in insurance companies that I could be able to fit into?
Wow, that's a great question, Kin Long. Well, I would say this, data, data, data. We are becoming so data driven, and I suspect as a PhD student, you're probably doing a lot of work in data analytics. There are a lot of jobs out there now that are related to data analytics. And I would tell you and we're going to need more and more people who have the ability to really dig into data and slice and dice it so that we understand our risks better, our portfolios better. And when I say our portfolios, I'm not talking investment, I'm talking our portfolio of risks. Predictive analytics is something we are all doing now. So I would be thinking in terms of data analytics, because we have an absolute need for that. I know at Arch, we're working really hard. I spend a lot of time, people think as a chief claims officer, well, you must be dealing with big claims all the time. Actually, I rarely deal with big claims. I mean, yes, they'll get me involved. I spend a lot of time looking at our portfolio of claims, trying to figure out what's going on, looking at the data, to understand what's happening out there, be it from the performance of our business or even from a staffing perspective. So I would suggest to you in where you're going, data and data analytics might be a good area. And actually, I would recommend that to everyone in risk management. Whether it's something you're actually going to do, get comfortable with data and data analytics. I used to say it's the future. It's not the future. It's here right now. So. I know Jody Stewart. I appreciate her comments. She said, agreed, Pat, law firm culture is the worst. So I'm not the only one who feels that way. I learned a lot. I won't lie. I'll never give back those 5 years I spent in the law firm because I learned a ton about how to look at cases, how to think. It's interesting. I say to people all the time, you go to law school to learn about the law, you start working to learn how to be a lawyer, and they're two completely different skill sets. So I spent that 5 years learning how to be a lawyer after having gone to law school to learn about the law. Kind of strange that I'm saying that, but it is what it is. So any other questions I can answer for you guys?
Lucy agrees. Jenna, we have a question. Pat, do you have any book recommendations about great company culture or professional development?
Oh boy, Jody's going to be mad at me. I should have those at the tip. I'm actually looking at my list of books here that I've read recently. I'm going to throw out just different book. Well, here's some interesting stuff. So I do recommend, and it's not directly on corporate culture, but you can learn certain things. I'm going to throw out a couple recommendations. Read a book called Black Edge. It's actually the book about the investigation into Steve Cohen and his hedge fund. And what that demonstrated to me is how you can create cultures of extreme risk taking and pressure that is actually detrimental. Not, look, some people actually went to jail for what they did there, but it also shows you how cultures can evolve into that. A podcast, for those of you who are baseball fans, a podcast called The Edge. And that was the story. Those of you who are baseball fans know about the cheating scandal with the Houston Astros. And it's a really great, about 8 or 9 part podcast. I mean, I'm gonna tell you the conclusion. The conclusion the guy made is that the owner of the team just created this culture of extreme risk taking, again, which caused people to step over the line and actually cheat. I'm actually I'm looking here at my list here. Jody, if you're there, you may need to help me out with some great books on that. Those are the 2 that I would recommend. So I apologize. I don't have any other recommendations than that. You know, but hold on a second. Let me look at some notes here, because I'm always writing down notes of books to read and stuff. And I just got to see what I've got in my list here that may be helpful.
Pauline's recommending 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, Stephen Covey's book. Absolutely. I read that book. That is an absolutely great book. Yeah, I'm reading a lot of different stuff right now, but nothing on corporate culture, unfortunately. But I love the 7 Habits. Carolyn Krauss has got the Culture Code. Leaders Eat Last. Adam Grant is a good one. There was a book written, and I want to find it. There used to be, they actually still have it in the New York Times. I've got the book here somewhere. I just can't see it where it's on my bookshelf. There was a columnist on the New York Times, and I forget what the name of the column was. They still have it. And it might have been Adam Grant who wrote it, but he would have an interview with a different CEO on Wednesdays and Sundays to talk about things. And one of the things he talked about was corporate culture. And he wrote a book when he stopped writing the column about all the things that he saw, all these different patterns when he was interviewing these CEOs. And it was a great book because you really get into how CEOs think, and it answered questions about how they interviewed people, how they thought about company culture. I actually gave it as a gift to Matt Schulman when he was named our CEO. If I remember the name of it, well, I have it here on my bookshelf, and I will send it to Rachel, and I'll have her send it to you, because I would recommend that to everyone, because it really gets into the mind of how CEOs think. I just don't remember the name of it.
This is great. We need to start a book club list here.
Oh, that's a great one. What do you wish you knew in college? I laugh about that one because look, I have a saying, and first of all, to preface this, my kids are 23 and 20. And my nieces and nephews run between the ages of 25 and 21. And I always say to them, you guys are a bunch of knuckleheads, because you're living proof, and this has been shown by psychologists, that the decision-making part of the brain doesn't form until your late 20s. And I can call you knuckleheads because of that, because all the decisions I see you make are evidence of that. But then I say to them, I can also say that because when I was your age, I was king of the knuckleheads. So I wish I understood that. To be perfectly honest with you, that I really needed to think better about my decisions and think more long term. I'll give you this advice. This is what I wish I knew. Every decision I make now, I think about it at the long-term ramifications, because that's much more important than the short term. So you really need to be able to delay gratification. And almost in every situation where I've done that, okay, my decision has been a better decision, financially, professionally. I mean, think about what I talked about careers being linear. I mean, look, I could have passed up some of those opportunities because, yeah, it's just a lateral move. So what? I'll wait for the big, move up. But in the long term, it prepared me for the role of general counsel and chief claims officer. So I would say, think about your decisions in terms of delaying gratification, for lack of a better word. Think of the long-term positive as opposed to the short term. I will give you, and then I will say one other thing which has nothing to do with business, and this is the advice that I give to everyone, including my own daughters. Live 20% below what you can afford. Okay, and here's why. That sounds like, well, what does he mean by that? Take money out of the equation. Okay, when you live below what you can afford, you're never worried about it. And so much of worry of people, and rightfully so, I worried about how am I going to get my kids through college? How am I going to do this? But when you live below what you can afford, you take that completely out of the equation. So I say, don't think about money about what you can buy. Think about money as equaling freedom, because then every time you spend a little of that freedom goes away. And that's how I kind of look at it. So that's basic life advice. And please feel free to dismiss it. I say a lot of things to my kids that they completely dismiss, but I just keep saying it. Maybe it'll sink in at some point. But that's the number one piece of advice that I give to people. Particularly people starting out. And it's hard when you're younger. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's harder then. So what I would say to you is what you do is you start living 5% below what you can afford. And then every year you make a little more money, you continue. Don't let what they call lifestyle inflation kick in. Okay, continue to live under what you can afford. And then at some point you are 20% under what you can afford. That would be my advice. And I really want to find that book by the guy from the New York Times, but unfortunately, I got so many books on my bookshelf now that I can't see them all there. But I'll send that to you, Rachel. I would ask you to share that with everybody.
Sounds good. I can share this whole list. This was an amazing amalgamation of everyone's recommendations. Thank you. I'm going to, it's 1:54, so I think we'll wrap it up. Pat, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for this really robust conversation, and for everyone on the call. These were really great questions. Thank you for participating. I also wanted to give a shout out. Julie Franny's on the line. She was really the mastermind behind putting this together on Arch's side and making sure Pat was looped in and invited. So Julie, thank you for all your work on the Arch side and making today's webinar happen. I will, as I mentioned, I'll share the recording of the session if you have anyone that you want to share Pat's webinar with today. And then just a shout out for our webinar series. We are going to be kicking off Spencer's summer webinar series in June. It will be every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time from June through August. So stay tuned for that. We will be sending out some postings later in the spring. And with that, Pat, thank you once again. This was fantastic. We really appreciate you giving your time.
No, thanks to all of you again for joining on what is, again, in the Northeast, at least a beautiful day. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. Everyone be well.
Stay well, everyone. Thank you.